Okay. Much gratitude to our interpretation team tonight. And thank y'all for being here. This is Beyond Policing, divesting from police, investing in communities. This has been an 8-part political education series in a collaborative effort between NC Block and NC Span. We've been doing this for the past 4 weeks. This is our 4th week. And it has been a pleasure to have such timely and necessary conversations, output of information, critical conversations about what it means to keep our community safe and what it means to commit to that. Tonight, after having a few weeks of talking about things like the history of policing, about policing in schools, in the school to prison pipeline, after talking about policing and migration, everything from in-money bail, and how that looks across the US, to the She Safe, We Safe campaign by BYP 100. We want to hone in tonight on alternative structures, ways in which our movements and our communities and our organizations are experimenting and really committing to the embodiment of creating something new. And so we have 3 wonderful people, and our spaces, our panelists, our presenters, our facilitators have purposefully been folk in North Carolina. However, we do have a guest tonight from DC, especially with our conversation on alternative structures. There's definitely a specific part of our movements in which we can learn from each other, which we can be working across states, across regions. And so I'm very thankful to have someone outside of North Carolina tonight. But without further ado, I'll let our panelists introduce themselves. And they will all have about 10 to 15 minutes to first introduce themselves, of course, but to also talk about their work, how that work came about, and what their experience has been in working towards alternative structures. So I won't call anyone. I'll let folk go when they feel called.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Kuru, and I'm open to all pronouns. I build in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I am building with Black-led alternatives, folks who build build power, build creative solutions, build relationships for the self-determination of Black folks. And I'm a part of the North Carolina Black Leadership Organizing Collective. I steward a network that we are calling the Sovereign Underground. It's a network, a cohort of Black folks who are in North Carolina who represent different communities across the state, local communities, and also means of intervening and disrupting and transforming the way that that we live our lives, our material conditions. So I came into the work by birth. You know, I don't know that I've made a choice. The more I've learned, the more I come into the work. But as far as the economic piece, personally, I have personally experienced an awareness of how the way that capitalism and the way that I experience the economic system of capitalism is harmful to my own being, harmful to my life. And I was on a personal path of self-determination as an organizer. And what we found as coming together with other Black led alternatives, Black folks building across the state of North Carolina, is that that was something that we all had in common. We were coming together to talk about, to try to build a collective table to build political power in 2019. And we were looking for ways to get funding to sustain and support our interventions. And the more we got to know each other, the more we discovered that we were not empowered in our own lives. You know, we were looking for funds to support projects, and we couldn't pay our rent. We were unhoused. You know, we were experiencing real threats to our well-being, making the choice between getting medicine and paying a car note. And so we decided as a group that we wanted to focus on economics and really put our take our values as the North Carolina Black Leadership Organizing Collective and put that into a lens of what does that mean for the way that we experience and transform our material conditions. And so it started off with funding. We were talking about what can we do together that's hard for us to do apart. We were making an intervention around toxic philanthropy and how we were being forced to fit into these boxes that were created by foundations who were so far away from our work and didn't seem like they were as really interested in our work. And we were representing folks on the ground, and we knew what we wanted and needed to do. And so we wanted to shift and be able to self-govern, and how we manage our funds, how we get our funds, and we came together to do that collectively. We also have been in a practice of just a collective study, learning about the economy, learning about capitalism, learning about alternatives to capitalism, and getting an understanding together. Our first priority is relationship building. In 2019, we prioritized the goal and of liberation, and we really didn't name relationship. And what we're seeing is, that our economic system is really grounded on the way that we experience relationship with one another. And so that's something that we build on. So we're, it's really a transformative experience. We're coming up with our economic alignments and agreements. We're coming up with lots of questions and toolkits because we're in a series of practice. And in September, we'll be introducing what we've learned and getting feedback from hopefully all of you so that you can inform the way we continue to build out our economic intervention as a collective. And yeah, so the other questions about, I hope I answer everything. What am I missing? Black Power, we're building for what we do is political. And that's another piece, is that linking our economic situation, our economic experience with our political power. And so finding ways to deal with the utility shutoffs, coming up with collective policy to put a moratorium on evictions, building for even more, going deeper into land, reparations. I'll put my background, but some of the things that we've come up with, they all come from the ground. We represent our communities, and all of the things that are behind me in the background are related to economics. And And so we're in a practice of ethical enterprise, of rigor around the way that we approach philanthropy, and also decolonizing philanthropy and decolonizing the way that we experience those who support our work, and really training those folks up.
Uhuru, I think if you can also talk a bit about how you feel like Sovereign Underground fits into that, I think that would be great as well.
So my we is the Sovereign Underground. The Sovereign Underground is a place of a cohort of building and practicing infrastructure. So what we're doing is we're coming together as Black-led alternatives, and we're discovering what our common goals are, and unlearning exploitive economics and capitalism, and also making practicing finding out ways where the gaps are so we can come together and build an infrastructure that is missing currently. So the infrastructure that we deal with, that, you know, to get loans, for example, to get the funds for COVID, small businesses, all of that infrastructure for unemployment, these things that are seen as available to everyone, but are actually coded with racism and anti-Blackness. We're taking an approach to develop alternative practices to be able to build an infrastructure that can operate outside of all of those anti-Black systems that we have.
Thank you so much, Uhuru. And this is the perfect time to introduce our Q&A. I see somebody has already used it. And so make sure that if any questions come up for you as our panelists are speaking, that you put it in the Q&A. We'll be getting to all of these questions later in our time together. But yeah, we like to make sure that all questions are in the Q&A to help keep them together in case the chat starts to get some momentum and it's going fast, and we don't want to miss anyone's questions. Yes, and also I encourage people to also put like people's maybe name or organization beside your question, if and only if it is directed to a specific person or organization. So thank you, Uhuru. Who wants to go next?
I can go next. Hi, y'all. My name is Keisha Millette. My pronouns are she, her. I live in Durham, North Carolina right now. I'm a North Carolina native, and I'm part of Durham Beyond Policing, which is a grassroots coalition that's been working since 2016 to find ways to divest from policing and invest in communities. And so our work has evolved in many ways over the last several years to use as a group our collective imaginations around safety and what that looks like to be safe in our communities. So I wanted to ask a question to folks, if you could indulge me and respond in the chat, like, what does safety look like to you? I'd love to be able to call out some of your responses. So what does safety look like and feel like to you? Okay, I see freedom, walking freely at night. Any other thoughts on safety? Recognizable community, free from fear, consensual pleasure, no fear, not having to look over your shoulder in the neighborhood you live in. I'll say my laughter, thanks. Resources, being able to be authentic without fear, being able to drive without being pulled over because a cop is behind you. Imagination, trust in relationships, economic sustainability, having what I need and having all the resources and tools to be able to define what that is. Open expression of self, unbothered Black joy, fear of police, familiarity, not worrying about harm, yes, comfort. Okay, the list can go on and on. There's so many things that we're seeing here that safety looks like, and I didn't see anyone name safety as looking like having more police. So that's something that we really think about with Durham for All. So one thing that we did was focus on what are some models of community safety and wellness that already exist for us locally. And some things that we see that we have in Durham are a harm-free zone that's led by Spirit House. We've had Black Mamas bailout actions through Southerners on New Ground, She Safe, We Safe through BYP 100, All of Us or None. And also since the time, particularly being amplified since the time of the coronavirus pandemic, is mutual aid networks that several already existing and more coming into existence during that time. We also looked at models of safety, community safety and wellness outside of Durham and other places, such as the Cahoots model, which provides crisis assistance and assistance to people in need without direct police interference. So our group formed, like I said, in 2016 in response to the proposed building of a new police headquarters, and kind of reframed and formed again to respond to a proposal from Durham Police, from the Durham Police Chief, to hire 72 new police officers. And kind of sparked by one of our local community leaders, we had this idea of what would it look like, instead of having 72 new police officers, what if we had 72 new people who were able to engage folks in the streets and think about what is it that their needs are, how can they be supported, what does safety really look like for them, what are some other ways that we could use our resources that don't include hiring additional police. So our group put in some work over several weeks to develop a proposal for a community safety and wellness task force and against the hiring of the additional police officers. And we presented it to City Council, and City Council rejected the proposal for the hiring of additional police officers and agreed that they would look into community safety and wellness task force. So that was 1 year ago. Today, where we stand is the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force has met initial approvals through City Council and Durham Public Schools, and we're still pushing on the county commissioners to approve it. Essentially, what this group would look like, what the work of this group would be to be in existence for a year at least, research and uplift existing Durham community safety and wellness initiatives, research those similar safety and wellness initiatives in other US cities and around the world, and then propose new systems of community safety and wellness for Durham City and County investment. So for those of you who have been doing work for many years, I know I'm newer to doing this work, you know this road isn't easy and the path isn't easy. And one of the real challenges we're facing right now with the county commissioners is that several members want to still have law enforcement be a part of this task force, even though we specifically attempted to create this task force without law enforcement, so that we could really be thinking creatively about alternatives that don't include that. And so that is one of the battles that we're waging right now. But we also realize that we can't just rely on the state to give us what we need is that we have to look to ourselves and think about ways that we can support ourselves in our work. And so continuing to, our group has grown tremendously to grow from just having a coalition space of local grassroots organizations to allowing individuals to join and participate. And so we are, creating a small force of folks who can really think about what is it that we need to be safe in our community locally. How can we look to models that are outside of our own space, and how can we raise the funds that we need in order to move this effort forward. And so those are some things that we are really focusing on at this moment, and ways that we're thinking about moving forward. The other challenges that we're facing is that in spite of what we've seen with the uprisings around the country, following the killings of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony McDade and others, that the Durham City Council decided to increase their police budget by 5%. So it's now $70 million. That represents 1/3 of Durham's general fund. Now, I'm sure if you all reflect on what you said would make you feel safe, there's so many other ways that so much of that money could be used. And one of those ways that we have really tried to highlight locally is the fact that city workers have not gotten their scheduled pay increase. And so even just having the wages that people need in order to survive, we're not seeing. We are also seeing that city retirees face a 20% cut in their health insurance funds and increases to water and sewer rates. So this is what we're facing locally, but I imagine wherever you are, you may hear similar stories or may have stories of triumphs to share. If you do, please note in the chat. Would love to see that. So these are some of our current demands as Durham Beyond Policing. So the first one for us is 100% defunding of the police budget and reallocation of that budget to fund programs that meet community needs. So really thinking about what is it that our communities need, what is it that our communities are asking for, and how can we meet those needs. We are also demanding approval of the Community Safety and Wellness Task Force by the county commissioners and a full funding of that task force as we have requested. And in support of the efforts of BYP 100, for Durham Public Schools to cancel their contract with the Sheriff's Department for school resource officers, because we also know that having police in schools do not keep us safe. So that's just a brief overview of our work. I can include some of our contact info and our webpage in the chat. Oh, never mind, because Felicia is on it. Let's see, I just want to read a few other things that I'm seeing people saying about what safety looks like to them. So not worrying about harm, comfort, your character or color not mattering, equality in healthcare, and not having to always be hypervigilant and being able to get my needs met without extraordinary work or having to move into imposter mask. Oof. Yes, so continuing to reflect on those locally as a part of Durham Beyond Policing. And also just want to note, I'm seeing Tina Marshall mentioned there's a police task force that's doing some of the same work in Charlotte. So that is really great to hear as well. I could briefly, oh, go ahead for me. Okay, I can really briefly, I realize there are a couple of questions that we had posed to us. So one thing I would say in terms of like, what are some alternatives, safety alternatives that would really excite me personally? I would say that I've become really excited around the ideas of diving into transformative justice and what does that look like? So how do we really think about what we do when harm is caused, and how do we really broaden our concept of what safety looks like and how inclusive safety can be? Because in so many instances, especially when it comes to policing. Safety is limited to public safety, and the public somehow excludes so many of us. So one thing that I've started using personally is pods. And so you may have heard of pod mapping, and I wish I had a resource to point you to, but the very basic of pods is thinking about who in your cohort, who in your group, the folks that you trust, would you call out to if you've been harmed? Identify maybe 5 people that you may be able to, who may be in your pod, that you may call, who would you call out if you've been harmed, and who would you call out to if you have harmed someone? So what are some ways that we can think about, oh, yes, thank you. What are some ways that we can think about these issues that don't require state intervention, that don't require police to be involved? And then the other thing I would say that we're seeing on a broader scale, but that are some of the challenges that I find that people face and that I've had to overcome myself for sure, is really tapping into our collective imagination around what liberation can look like. Really thinking about collectively, what could our world look like beyond policing? Do we need to have police? And really understanding that the existing laws and practices that we have in place right now are made up. Someone made them up and a bunch of people agreed and decided to follow along, which means that right now we're in a golden moment where we have an opportunity to transform so much of this and think of what can we create collectively together that's going to ensure that our interests are being considered and that we are having the support that we need to be safe.
Thank you so much, Keisha. Yes, indeed. And if you have any questions for Keisha and anything that Keisha said, please, please, please put it in the Q&A.
I see a question that I think would be for me. It's around allies on Durham City Council.
Oh, well, wait, just wait.
Oh,
We're gonna let the last person go on the panel, and we'll get to the Q&A in just a second. We're gonna let that stack. So yeah, Kiki, you ready?
Yeah. Hey everyone, you can hear me all right?
Yes.
Beautiful. Hey y'all, my name is Makia, and people who love me call me Kiki. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm coming to you from DC. I'm with the Black Lives Matter chapter out here, as well as the Working Families Party. And so I am gonna try and represent hundreds of activists and organizers who've been working on building alternatives to policing in our district. We are not a state. And right, tell your person to fight for statehood. And so I will say a lot of our work comes out of the movement for Black Lives moment in 2015, right? People were organizing around police accountability, organizing around police brutality, taking to the streets. And we had a conversation with folks who really got into policy about how can we build something outside of this, right? And out of that, through research and about 4 years of organizing. So it took 3 years for us to put forth what we call the NEAR Act. So it's the Neighborhood Engagement Achieves Results Act. And that is based on a lot of the things that the other panelists have brought up, the different models of crisis response, the different models of community accountability, in all things of how are we going to interrupt violence and prevent violence outside of from police. And so it's a public health view on violence, and we did base building, we did protest. We had to get each person in every ward, each leader to know what this was so that we could get it voted in the council. And so when we got it voted in the council, because we are a district, our council is our legislative body. And so it got passed in the council, and then you had to get it funded. And that took 2 years because our mayor was actually wanted her own type of crime bill. And so she was fighting against it and wanting her thing to get passed and funded. But we actually won against the mayor. And so some of the things that our NEAR Act does is that it provides grants for organizations that are looking to do violence interruption. And so one of the things that came up from that was that even though people were like, I'm excited to talk about violence interruption, I'm excited to dive into what is safety beyond policing, then they still started trying to work with police, right? So once the bill goes through, the money is there for the department, they're giving grants to people who are like also calling the cops when they get to the block. And we're like, that's not how it works. And so our Office of Neighborhood Safety and Engagement is modeled after a program that was in Richmond, California. And one of the things is that we really wanted to use something they call the CURE model, CURE. And so our workaround when we started finding that there were people receiving the grants that were still trying to work with police is that we started supporting a group called Cure the Streets, which is a public safety pilot program to reduce violence, and really worked with them to tailor that, right? So that provides support and funding for returning citizens to, or formerly incarcerated folks, however you identify, to then be able to get employed in helping us interrupt violence because you know your neighborhood, and being people in the community that are checking on folks. It also, the NEAR Act allowed us to, sorry, got a little pause, a lot of signal chops. And so another thing that the NEAR Act did was that we put forth having more mental health rapid responders for issues that are happening in the district. Also having a full data on police stops. And so this is, when you talk about data on police stops or putting mental health responders paired with police officers, Kiki today would not say this is an alternative to policing, right? But in the time, it's really also to show how illegitimate the police state is in solving these issues, right? That there is no real victim support center, right? That when people are experience violence and they go into in the hospital, that oftentimes it is right then that you need to intervene with a survivor of violence, so that there isn't a cycle of violence, right? To make sure that they actually have what they need. And so we worked using diversity of tactics of pushing forth policy, but then also in building a rapid response team of our own, right? So yes, there's Cure the Streets. You have people on the state side that are like being brought into the belief of abolition. And we build our own cop watch team. And we also have people that will go, so when you hear that someone has been shot or hurt either by police or by community violence, we're on the scene, right? We're there, we're talking to the family, we're checking to see if you have, do you have access to therapy? Do you have access to trauma care? Can you pay your rent this month? What are the things that you need that we want to make sure the state is also trying to do this, and we're going to pressure them and tweet at them and protest them. And while they take their sweet time, we still want to make sure you're good. And so the NEAR Act provided that for us to be able to have that diversity of tactic, to be able to say, the council, keep funding this, keep making sure this is real, and we're going to continue building our base and continuing to change hearts and minds on understanding how we need to have alternatives to the state. Some of the other ways that I think we are building alternatives is mutual aid during this, during the pandemic and the pandemic within a pandemic. We were very quick to build a large mutual aid network across the city. And we have from a mutual aid network that is supporting people with legal, that is supporting people with food, that is supporting people with helping them figure out their housing situations. And I would say hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars have been donated and used to purchase and also to distribute throughout the city, and was found that the work that we were doing, which is really based on relationships, was faster than anything the state was able to do. The state did not have the pantry set up, did not have unemployment set up. So people were actively calling our hotlines and our volunteers, and we've been able to move thousands of people around the understanding that this fissure showed that the state is not actually set to support the most directly impacted people. And so our mutual aid is still running, and we're doing over 4,000 deliveries. I think this month I think it's a little bit more. We do food as well as other things. So from our mutual aid to our violence interruption work, to our cop watch team. So there's cop watch around the city, but we also have a Black cop watch team that's in east of the river, which is another predominantly Black place in the city, to building all of those things out, and consistently just trying to make sure that we're redistributing wealth into things that are not controlled by the state as well. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the chat as I was going. The NEAR Act, yes, Neighborhood Engagement Achieves Results Act. Yep, I do. So, and what's really interesting about this is that like we have had to, our Attorney General is like, uses the NEAR Act as like his big thing. However, we had to fight him for that. And the police stops piece, we had to also sue the city, right? So we're like, we need full data because that will help us show that you are illegitimate at keeping us safe. And so we had to sue our mayor and sue the city for 2 years to get the data that we have today. Yeah. Are there any questions from you, Femi, or from the crew?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for giving y'all spills. I do have some questions. I would like to hear, Keisha kind of got us started. But I'd love to hear from each person, and you know, Keisha, feel free to expound. But in doing this work, what are some of the challenges that you see in your working spaces, in your organizing spaces, that kind of not stops, but makes creating and imagining safer spaces more complex, even more complex? What are some trends that you might be seeing across communities around where people may be getting stuck, or where people have a hard time grasping a collective vision of how we keep each other safe? You can talk about things like alignment, and this is for all three of y'all. Miscommunications, values. When we think about those things, what are some of the challenges that we have witnessed, that we may even be struggling with ourselves in creating safer spaces?
I'm coming in hot on this one, Femi, because you know, I have the realization that a lot of times when we talk about these, we use these words like freedom, liberation, power. You know, contrary to someone's opinion, we're not a monolith. We don't all mean the same thing. If I say tree, maybe there might be 50, 11 different trees that folks have in their mind based on you know, where they come from. So I am really excited about the process of holding council. When we come together, we don't seek to persuade anyone or even influence anyone. But this is a practice that I see is not necessarily inherent in some of our movement spaces. So some folks say, yeah, we believe our neighborhoods should have the choice. And they may believe that that means that a representative of the neighborhood should be able to do whatever they think is right and what they should do without any of us having a conversation and moving into alignment. So there's a resource around participatory decision making. And one of the the things that it talks about that I think we can miss in our movement building is that discomfort and divergence, struggle is part of the process. And so, you know, some of the practices that we use, for example, with the Sovereign Underground, is we only go forward at our alignments. So it's not, we can't outnumber someone on a boat. We only move forward when every single one of us is in alignment with it. And if any one of us is not in alignment, then what we say is that is not a collective move that we can make. And I think that that is something that isn't proliferated, you know, in our historical movements. And it's something that we on the call and, you know, all of us, you know, participating are really leaning into the practice. And it hurts, you know, to be in struggle. It really is painful. Feelings get hurt. It's uncomfortable. And I think there's a lot of conflation of our opinions, our feelings with ourselves and our identity. And so, you know, these practices where we embody, you know, practice embodiment of centering and awareness really help us understand, okay, I feel hurt, and be able to break down, is this because I'm hurt or because we're just having a moment of struggle? And I think something that's also missing is that discernment and decision making. When you can't move forward with the folks that y'all look cute together wearing the same shirts, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't move forward. That just means that that's not your team to move forward with on that particular piece. And it also doesn't mean it's a breakup. You know, it doesn't mean y'all can't wear your cute shirts anymore. It just means that, you know, it really just means you're just not moving forward with them on that particular action. And I think that's something that's missing. We've had a lot of, you know, we've witnessed the dissolution of actions and movements because of struggle. And what I see struggle as is actually something that fortifies us and gives us opportunities to practice our authenticity and to find our tribes for the things that we're called to do in this movement.
Very nice.
And Sammy, can you restate the question a little bit?
Sure. I want folks to speak on what are the challenges that they have witnessed in their respective communities, organizations, coalitions. And it can be broad, right? Because I'm just saying the challenges. It can be interpersonal. It can be in organizing strategies. And you know, a lot of times those things can heavily overlap. But what have you witnessed as far as challenges when it comes to building alternatives and working and struggling towards safer communities?
Right. The building alternatives part isn't the sexy part. The blocking is the sexy part, right? The you know, it's easy to react because we're like, I see this, right? There's police brutality in my city. I need to confront the state. I need to confront the police, and I can do that. And our ancestors have been doing that for a while. And oftentimes the building of alternatives, which I honestly feel has some things to do with the type of labor and like oftentimes feminized labor that comes in with building and organizing, is seen as not as fun. And it's not funded in the sense of like, we don't always give our dollars to that kind of work. And I say that it's not as fun is because it's harder to keep people in that work for the long term, because it takes a long time to build something and to build things that we've never seen before. And so burnout can happen because you're trying to build while you still have to block the state at the same time, and you still have to be. And so in our chapter, we use like the Buddhist mantra of build, block, and be as like the elements of our work. to be doing consistently. And that is not easy to do. People come in and out of movements. How can you have roles that are clear? Because like you said, there's going to be relationship breakdowns. I've had many relationship breakdowns. We're going to have political so like our cop watch team needs to be able to run, whether the person who runs it, April, is able to do it anymore. Sorry, my connection might be a little unstable. But yeah, so that the things that you're building can exist outside of just one person, and that we're not gatekeepers to those new institutions that we're building is really key. And then always, don't trust the state. Always have a plan B when you are working with the state. And I say that as someone who works in electoral politics.
Very nice. Thank you, Kiki. Keisha, do you have anything to add?
I'll just keep adding in the chat. I know there were a couple of other questions that folks had too.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. I don't want to miss anything that was in the chat. I think that one more question that I have for y'all is there any experiments, work that y'all are excited about, that you are watching, that may be your team, but across the country, across the world even? What are some ways in which people are experimenting with being empowered in their own safety, and building alternative structures?
So some things, and I'm sure more will come up as the other panelists share. But I know that what I really loved is the U-Medics team in Chicago that does they created their own crisis response. And so they teach young people how to respond to gunshot wounds, asthma attacks, and how to support, just like they continue to build their curriculum around ways that we can take care of ourselves, especially when you live in places where either the hospital nearby does not serve you, you have no trauma center near you, that kind of stuff. And so we have a similar thing in DC. And so they've been building there, and I'm just like, I love it. And so we actually had them come to DC for a training last year and hope to do that on an annual basis. And that's just one thing.
I want to shout out the youth of QC Family Tree who have come together with Kayla Pinson and have made some decisions about how they want to respond to things that they see that could be viewed as harmful to the community, and how they've made decisions about how to intervene, how to address it, and they're meeting on a regular basis and developing their awareness, and building practice on just showing up as a community member to handle their own issues so they don't have to call the police. And also I lifted in the chat the Charlotte Jail Support, and shout out to everybody who's listening, who is a part of that amazing occupation and humanitarian effort that is under attack at the moment, and has been under the attack since these uprisings. But yeah, the folks in jail support deal with all types of issues, human issues, and respond and react without calling police in, and also while maintaining community. I see DC jail support lifted, go Kiki, participatory defense, and Maryland bailout. That's lit.
Yeah, one thing that I love, I hope I can just put I'll just put 2 cents in as a moderator. But one thing that I really love and witness and struggle around, and always remain very curious about is like the structure of jail support. Because I think that it's doing so much. I think that it is experimenting and being an embodiment of what restorative, of what restorative justice can be, um, around rapid response, around community defense, around like it's just there's so much that goes on when you can meet your people as they come outside those doors, and not only do that, but provide resources right then and there as well. So yeah, I see people just shouting out their jail support structures and court watches in their respective areas. And yeah, shout out to those people that have really been holding that down. It's one of those not seen as sexy, more maybe not even thought about roles in our direct action, even not even in our movements, but in our direct action. Those people hold it down after. Yeah, direct actions are seen and get media. There are people holding down people who have yet to be released. And even picking up other cases along the way. Like it's a very intricate, prominent web that is really trying to tackle a lot of atrocities and the intersections of those atrocities in our criminal justice system. So that's just my 2 cents. Keisha, did you want to add?
Yeah, I added in the chat, but I'll say definitely participatory defense is one of those things. And I think just watching the beauty of what people are able to do to survive in these times right now. Like it's just really being able to see people engage in sustainable practices, thinking about how can we grow our own food, how can we look out for our neighbors, how can we support each other, and it not requiring something that has to be so massive that we need to develop a program and a structure and identify funding, but really just like looking out for your neighbor or your friend. So those are some of the things that I'm seeing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm
Yeah, there
so
is.
folks, participatory defense, have y'all talked about that so far?
Go ahead.
Well, I just know that, so I did not learn about, I learned about participatory defense when I comrade Kiana Johnson, who does Black Women Bailout and PG, and also is a formerly incarcerated person who supports life after release. And so the amazing thing about participatory defense is really, it's just, like Keisha said, like it's just you helping people advocate for themselves when they're going through the court system, and like how they can organize their family to also be how they can organize their family to support them, and all the things that people had mentioned from jail support and participatory defense are practices. They're practices in how we can transform our relationships to one another and transform our relationship to the state. And so I agree with Keisha and Uhuru, like they're just pick a role, and perfect your craft. And being in that practice is what will also transform us personally, and then collectively will transform the places in which we live and how we depend on the police state.
Mm-hmm. 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 Mm-hmm.
I want to lift, the local support funds too, the folks raising funds so that all of the stressors that go into our people having to make decisions to go into more dangerous hustles. Those funds that went out and that are continuing to go out to get folks food and shelter and all of the housing, all of the things that we need to help us thrive, keep us from making those survival choices. And I just love groups like Greensboro Mutual Aid, shout out for really plugging in the need to not judge or relegate people to a different standard based on how they earn their income. And so making it just a unilateral standard that we all need support and we all can offer no matter what we do. And yeah, that's really helpful.
Thank y'all so much. Okay, so we have a couple of questions in the chat. And so we'll go over them. And so I see that y'all did a dope job of answering in the chat. I'm also just going to read them out loud. And so let's see. Recommendations of books, documentaries, or other sources for learning about economics, capitalism, and alternatives to capitalism. To Uhuru, from somebody from the Freedom Summer Fellow crew. Woo-hoo. And so Uhuru recommended Ruth Gilmore Wilson, Change Everything, Racial Capitalism and the Case for Abolition, Winner Takes All, Black Marxism, and for racial capital, of course, Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed are a few. I wonder if anybody else has any, I know you directed to Uhuru, but has anybody else been like stimulated from that question? Any other, must reads that come up for you when you think of alternatives to capitalism and for learning more about capitalism and economics in general? Okay. And if not, that's okay.
I do want to offer that the Cola Nut Collective out of Chicago has a lot of resources for folks. There's a lot going around from mutual aid. The Highlander, somebody's reading the pedagogy right now. That's lit. Yeah, there are resources. Ed Whitfield has been writing articles and was with the Fund for Democratic Communities, and has a lot of resources as well. Lift Up to Our Elders. Oh, and Collective Courage. I added that later. Mm-hmm. But definitely that is a great one.
Mm-hmm. I would say Ahmad Shaki, Black Liberation and Socialism. I can type that in the chat later, but Ahmad Shaki, Black Liberation and Socialism. Cool. Got the answer to that. Can you put the book names in the chat? Yes, we can do that. Hold on. Let me copy and paste.
Just did it for me.
Oh, you did it? Oh, okay, yes, you did. You're great. Okay. And so we have, I think, two. This is something that I would love to talk about a little bit, and to even get dreamy about it. And a question was asked, and I'll read Uhuru's lovely answer. But what are ways we can unlearn capitalism? Such a big question. And I think that is not anything that we can, like, unlearning capitalism is not a big gulp. It's not a big bite. It's not something that we can do in one move or in one step. And so, yeah, I'm wondering, who says the truth is a lot of us are practicing economic practices that are not capitalist. They are not exploitive of Black folks and those delegated as lower class while lucrative to white owner class. A lot of us with side hustles doing hair, watching babies, house sitting, growing food, helping folks with logos, etc., are making no harm exchanges for our offerings. Study the pre-colonial practices of our folks who will find those examples today. Yes, I think that's brilliant. There's many ways in which we could, keep we can keep expounding on that. What if other panelists want to expound on that or think of other ways that they've been thinking about, or tool, even in your own life, ways that we can unlearn capitalism?
I would say for me, really briefly, one of those things is thinking about what do we value in our society and what holds value. So looking beyond the concept of money and dollars and certain understandings of power being valuable, but thinking about what is valuable in our community and then how can we actually share those resources and recognizing that we all have resources that can be shared in some way. So that's something that I know I've been really working on for myself.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Keisha.
I think the other point of unlearning capitalism is also rejecting it or shutting it down as well, and I think having awareness of whose values are informing our commercial decisions. Just having that awareness of when we're being grabbed into some values that actually dehumanize us as a people. For example, whose values are dictating what is actually nourishing food, whose values are dictating what you consider as entertainment, the things that we need. Go ahead, Felicia, what are you saying?
Yeah, I know that you had mentioned before too, some specifics around funders as well, because I know that that's what you've been doing a little bit of work with folks too. So I think that's a question for everyone as well, if I may, is sort of to think about how do we unlearn capitalism while also many of our organizations are working to get funding, right? And so how have folks found maybe some way to really be cognizant of that relationship?
Yes, indeed.
Do you have do you want to start us off, Felicia? Dr. Arriaga?
Things are, no, I mean, I think that I definitely don't have an answer. I do think that especially because it's an electoral season, I think folks have a lot of these like ability to think about when do you take money, especially if it's going to be for candidates that you don't, or like to work on candidates that you don't believe in, right? Like I think that that's one step, is having that discussion about what kind of harm is that going to also introduce to maybe the groups that you're working with in that period. I think that this is a huge question, right? I think if we're looking to do fundraising with like bigger nonprofits, I think, or bigger sort of funding pools, we also really have to think about like how are we pushing them to consider their relationship, right? And where they've been involved in funding things that are not aligned with our values, right? So I think that's going to be, people are going to be able to do that more, right? If you have other sources of funding, right? I think this is where we also see like mutual aid or right our own sort of like giving circles really tapping into our own community members instead of thinking about we need to go get this like big money from this big foundation that has questionable practices. I think that's the only way we begin to start doing that. And again, also pushing back so that they recognize that their practices are problematic. I think that's the only things that I have at the moment.
Yeah, I think those values, having these discussions of what we value, what our vision is, and maintaining a course that of alignment in our decision making, who we throw down with, who we build with. I think that's a pretty timely question, because one of the main actors in North Carolina, again, that has been a huge economic justice, what do you call it, bad actor, or an enemy of people, really has been utility companies. And now we have folks who are facing an invitation to take money from utility companies and they're calling it like it's for Black-led alternatives for social justice. Meanwhile, these utility companies are lobbying to, there's a call happening right now, to shut off utilities of people during the pandemic, who are being told, who generationally have been forced into low-income work, who these utility companies are really hardcore lobbyists in our state and nationally. They keep our wages low, and they keep the prices that we pay for utilities high. And so, these types of questions, it's worth looking into the background of these foundations and funders, and having an answer before you even faced with the request of how we want to deal with this, how are we going to use capitalism, because that's the system that we have access to actually get to where we're going. And that is a hard, question to answer when we look at the Wall Street and how violent Wall Street is to our people. But life insurance is one of the most effective ways that our people have been able to get land and to get to start building generational wealth. So it's something that I think we should continue talking about and building on, and building alternative institutions so that we can have a choice to not have to deal with that.
Excellent, Uhuru. And you were kind of touching on a new question that came up in our Q&A, which is, do you see any value in learning to maneuver through the capitalist system while we try to dismantle it? That's the beef, the meat, the core of the question. And then another one. So yeah, I think it's also kind of touching on, like, is it strategic to work within the system as we struggle and scheme and dream for a new one? And then more specific to North Carolina, is there a list of lobbyist groups that are standing in our way in North Carolina? I don't know if Felicia might have some info. That's not my part of the movement, but Felicia, you got anything?
I think it depends on like what we mean by standing in our way. I think just because the lobbyists that I tend to deal with are more so related to policing, that like the Police Chiefs Association, the North Carolina Sheriff's Association, folks who are pushing certain bail right recommendations, like all of those groups have lobbyists. If you can think about most sort of things are going to have some lobbyists at the General Assembly that's going to be pushing for what they want. And unfortunately, and other folks can chime in too, because I know probably Keisha has done some work at the General Assembly as well, that the folks on our side who are also part of this and trying to like push back are definitely outnumbered and don't have as much money, right? And so I think that that's where the past few months, we've at least like started to really think about alternative ways that particularly Black and Brown folks can start thinking about working on policy together so that we're actually able to push our own things, right? And not depend on white lobbyists who might be on our side, but actually maybe not actually uphold our values. And so I think that this is a constant struggle for us, is to think about like who are trusted lobbyists who are actually going to be upholding values that we've sort of committed to as like networks, as the Black Leadership and Organizing Collective. Like we have set values, but we don't necessarily have folks who are maybe in those lobbying positions that are actually doing that on behalf of us. So I think this is still a process. We do know that most of the like those utility companies, all of those sort of groups are going to have lobbyists that are paid a lot of money to do this at the General Assembly. So, but it is a specific type of work. If you've ever been lobbying and been at the General Assembly, it's not fun typically. Like there are going to be people who are there who are going to be very negative, racist, all of the things. So I think it's a space that people, if you're interested, I think we can talk more about it. But there has been a group called the Black and Brown Policy Network that has started in the past few months to really start to think about like the direction of moving some of this. But we also know that there has been a lot of like wins through that as well. So the Second Chance Act, right, finally was able to pass in North Carolina. And that was because community members were there, right, consistently trying to make sure that that happened. So I'm not saying that's like hopeless, but in the current structure we have, we also have to rely on a lot of white lobbyists who are not aligned with us to do some of that work at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's also important to name that everything that we experience isn't necessarily capitalism. So the community.
Uhuru, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Yeah, I just want to name that everything isn't capitalism. You know, this really is a hodgepodge of different economic attempts. You know, this is a very young government, and so we had some interventions. For example, you know, how do white folks how did they build so much wealth? How do to be able to live in suburbs and buy boats? Well, you know, we had the FHA, the redlining. Everybody hears about redlining. The other side of that was that there were suburbs that were created. So white folks were subsidized to live in these suburbs and were able to build equity in that way. And so that was something that was systemic, that offered privileges, and it continues to offer privileges. And so, you know, something that's exciting is that there's some reparations or type restorative justice initiatives coming out at the local level, and what it looks like to me is a local attempt to really bring Black and brown folks to the standard that white folks have in getting our equity, getting what is due to us. But yeah, that was a welfare program for white soldiers, white workers that wasn't afforded to us. And so, you know, I think the history is really important in understanding what the options are, but also just looking around and paying attention to these local referendums to get reparations or have reparation statements have a lot in there. And looking at the attack on the Community Reinvestment Act that's happening, the CDCs, the Community Development Corps, those are being attacked, but they're still available to us at this time. And so using those things that are in our system to build what we need is available. I wish that the people on the call could actually could talk with us right now. I would love to hear some of the folks in the chat chime in. I see Kim wrote a note that the tourism groups control the school calendar in North Carolina. You know, just having an awareness of things like that. Tina Marshall is someone that Tina Marshall mentions the older you get, the harder it is to unlearn capitalism and white supremacy. And Kim says it's a weaning process to unlearn it and be consistent. We have to be more conscious about what kind of environment we want and the future. Consciousness.
Thank you so much, Uhuru. We're gonna wrap up. I'm wondering if there's any last comments, or just things that our panelists want to say. And there are in my humble opinion, there are many structures, that kind of we depend on, we participate in, we that keep our communities going, even if it's not to the best of their abilities. There's structures around food, and all of these have kind of been touched on this evening. Structures around money and economics, structure around public safety, community safety, structures around education, and access to knowledge, structures around skill building and trade, etc. Right? And I'm wondering, as you close out, as you make your closing statement, panelists, what are one or two structures that you're really, and it doesn't have to be that you're working on, one that you're working on, one that you kind of uplifted in what you said this evening, but what's one or two structures that you're really would love to see in your lifetime, that you're really excited about seeing transformed, seeing build anew? And I can model, I'll break that wall. But yeah, I think around food, I think that that's one that kind of like how Uhuru kind of touched on, of this is not an absolute, capitalism, you know what I mean? It's not just yeah, I'm right there with you. There's definitely an alternative economy. It's criminalized, you know what I'm saying? It has been, a lot of our alternative economies have been used to fuel the criminal justice system, etc. And I think that and then when I think about any of the words you want to use, alternative economies, underground economies, I think that food lives so deeply in that, from the way in which we feed each other, that we take care of each other, from the how I like to say the plate restaurants, people who sell plates out of their homes, out of their kitchens, across demographics. I think community gardens, and it's dope to see an influx of community gardens. This is not the first time that there's been a influx in community gardens. And of course, we come from a history of toiling and taking care of land. Yeah, when I see our relationship to food, even how food, when we get into health, how food has been used to kill us, to turn us against our own culture, etc., has been used to perpetuate, everything from myths of unhealth to fat phobia, to perpetuating tropes around our communities. There's so much in food that I look forward to seeing how we take care of our own meals, how we define what food is for us, how food can, yeah, and I think it's so possible. I see it. It's I already see glimpses of it in the presence. Yeah. And whoever wants to go next. your closing statements, and what structure you're excited to see an alternative to or to see transformed.
Well, thanks y'all for inviting me and just for the rich conversation on this panel and for folks being involved in the chat and everything. That's really great to move the discussion forward. I just want to say that, like, so much of what we're doing, like, we're continuing to build and vision around, and it's very helpful to have folks like those who are getting trained in this collective and others like continue to help us dream around what it is that we are wanting to achieve collectively. And one of those things really also connects with what do we do once there's law enforcement is defunded. So certain things that we are aiming for is people having their basic needs met, people being able to live in a space that is actually safe for them so that they're not concerned about utility shut-offs or other challenges. And we understand that a lot of that is dreaming, and in some ways is even distant, but in other ways we're finding that some of what we are hoping to see is really within our grasp, and people are already starting to realize it in the work they're doing. And so there's this idea, one of the ideas that I would say during Beyond Policing also intends to push back against is this idea that there are people who are innately criminal. There are people who have been harmed, and there are people who cause harm. And so really thinking about, like, what do we do? And that could be the same person, and that could be within the same family or same cohort. So what do we think about? What are responses that call for accountability, that don't have to necessarily be punitive or call for punishment? And so that's something that's really calls for reframing around issues related particularly to law enforcement, and an insistence that the state needs to intervene in these matters altogether. So I would just say, just thinking about that, and just like continue to really dream, think to yourself, to your friends, what are the things that we can do to sustain ourselves, to support each other, to look out for each other? Like, how can we have each other's back during this time, and continue to move in ways that feel good, that are supportive of having our needs met?
Beautiful. I would say for my closing statement, overall, I feel like I'm in an experiment right now. And so I'm like, the moment you said that, I'm like, the stuff I'm building right now, I want it to coalesce. Like, I want my folks to stay past the summer. I want all of the teams that are working that can like also be connected under like strong principles, right? And really leaning into this background of who right there for self-governance, a self-governance strategy. And so I'm excited about that around all our eternal alternatives to police, as well as the state and prosecutors and things like that. How can we keep ourselves safe in that way? And just grateful to have this conversation, because there's so many next steps to the work that we've been doing during this uprising. Thank you.
Last but not least, who?
Y'all get at me. Let's.
You're muted.
You're telling my life, Kiki, with the self-determination. I just, I had an experience watching this movie of these people in slums in Brazil, but they had their own house and they had a courtyard and they were able to grow food in their courtyard. And I was just like, am I really, I'm really wishing, I'm in tears, wishing that I could choose these things for myself. and knowing that that's right. You know, I'm just gonna leave it with a quote from Queen Mother Maggie Gladden out of Asheville. And, you know, hope folks will email me to join us for our September series and on alternatives with the Sovereign Underground. But Queen Mother Maggie says we have to get along with each other and work together for the good of ourselves. The more we depend upon ourselves, the less we have to depend on other people. And that sums it up for me. I want to be in my pod, and among folks who experience me as human and make exchanges from my heart and receive exchanges from their heart, and be able to experience what it's like to be creative without the fear for my safety.
Excellent. I think that's a good way to wrap up. I want to thank everyone for being here with us this evening. And if you are on the call and have been to more than one in our 8-part series over the course of the 4 weeks, just say me in the chat. Just let yourself be known. If you have been to more than one over the course of these 4 weeks. We appreciate you. We appreciate you so much. This has been such a learning experience for us as well. And we're so thankful to cultivate space with our communities that we can learn together. And also put a me in the chat if this is your first one. You made it just in the nick of time at the very end, if this is your first one in the 8 parts. Glad to have you, Keisha. Glad to have you. This has been a panel and discussion on alternative structures and the work that's going on in North Carolina and beyond. Yes, since this is the last one, to be transparent. But you know, Black Black stands for Black Leader and Organizing Collective. And we are a network of Black organizers and Black that is making sure that we're building the infrastructure for Black organizers and Black-led organizations here in North Carolina. We have many things going on. One thing that we have going on this summer is a local power project that is a three-prong initiative to provide political education, leadership development, and development to our network, to our Black networks and Black-led networks here in North Carolina. One prominent part of that is our Freedom Summer. That is in collaboration with the Movement for Black Lives. If you are a Freedom Summer Fellow, make some noise in the chat. We appreciate y'all for being here. We also have, come on, big up. We also have our Build Network, which is launching very soon. Which is made up of community councils and networks to try to build different hubs of information, of resources, and of leadership across our state. We are experimenting with making 10 of those. And then there's a third one. Maybe it'll come back to me. I'll come back on the merry-go-round. But I do know that our next—
Mary's gonna
come
chime
on,
in.
Mary, help me, Mary.
Hey y'all, Mary, she, her, one of the 18 Marys on this call.
So the three-pronged, just to help out a little bit, I know there's a lot going on. So the result of the local power initiatives being, the Freedom Summer Fellowship, which there are 50 fellows across the state of North Carolina in collaboration with the Movement for Black Lives nationally. And then the second piece you said was build coordinators.
Yes.
8 of us across the state. And then the result, the hopeful result, is to be responsive to what Uhuru has mentioned around our build councils to help bolster local power and local formations who are doing really amazing work. I'm done.
Oh, great. We have another, thank you. We have another political education series that will be launching in like a week, or maybe even a few days to a week tops. And it is for Black August, and in celebration of Black August, in which we will be having several opportunities for workshops and political education opportunities throughout the month. So I'll leave that there. There's so much more work that NC Block is committing to. But let us know what NC Span is doing, Felicia.
I dropped our website so you can get some updates from us. We've been mostly supporting folks who are still organizing around the uprising, and one of those groups right now, which if you're in Winston-Salem, we'd love you to support those folks, the Triad Abolition Coalition, which has really been fighting to raise awareness about John Neville's death within the Forsyth County Jail. And so look out for some of us and what we'll be doing with the collective sort of week of action, which will be part of the North Carolina United for Black Lives, which will also be part of this Black August stuff that Block is doing as well. But yeah, send us an email if you want to do that. And we'll also be catching up with some folks in the fall. There will be a little bit of an announcement with trying to do some more budgeting related things related to police and sheriff budgets. So we'll be putting out a call for a cohort of folks to come and hang out and talk about that fun stuff, which is my favorite thing to talk about. But come if you're like-minded and like to look at numbers and talk about all of the things that is being wasted and could be put to better use on things like alternatives, etc. Yeah, I think that's it. But let us know. We have monthly meetings, and it's typically going to be the first Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m., which we will post on the website too. But that's it from me, Femi.
Thanks, Felicia. You're great. Another just round of thank yous to our panelists. Show them some love in the chat on your way out. For those who are left, thank you for wrapping up our Beyond Policing, Divesting from Police, Investing in Communities political education series. Thank y'all so much, and have a good night.